Before colonialism, indigenous and native communities have historically had a close and profound relationship with nature, viewing it not as a resource to be dominated, but as a living sacred entity to be respected and protected. This connection is fundamental to their cultures, spiritual beliefs, and traditional knowledge. Many indigenous cultures hold a deep reverence for the natural world, often personifying the earth as Mother Earth and the sky as Father Sky. This spiritual bond is central to their identity, passed down through generations via storytelling, ceremony, and art. Indigenous worldviews often emphasize that all living beings, humans, animals, plants, and natural elements are interconnected. This creates a sense of kinship and responsibility to maintain balance and harmony within the ecosystem. Rather than viewing land as a commodity to be owned and exploited, many indigenous peoples see themselves as its custodians. They live in a reciprocal relationship with nature, believing that their role is to care for the land, which in turn provides for them. This deep connection was systematically attacked by European colonizers, who sought to dominate and exploit nature rather than coexist with it. Colonial powers saw nature as a resource for extraction and profit, which led to unsustainable practices and vast environmental degradation. By forcibly displacing indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands, colonizers severed the deep spiritual and cultural ties between communities and their environment. Colonial-era conservation subjects were introduced in European colonies starting in the mid-19th century, driven by the imperial need to secure and manage resources for economic gain. This scientific forestry was often modeled on European practices and ignored traditional land management, leading to the establishment of forest services and research institutes across Asia and Africa. The dominant Western model of conservation has excluded spiritual pathways and maintained a human-centric focus due to its colonial roots' reliance on a materialist scientific worldview and the commodification of nature. The mainstream conservation movement is heavily influenced by a Western scientific paradigm that has traditionally viewed spirituality as unscientific and irrelevant to ecological facts. Many conservationists have historically viewed indigenous creation stories or spiritual beliefs as an impediment to science-based conservation, rather than a valuable source of ecological wisdom. Western thought has long operated on a dualistic framework separating humans from nature. This contrasts sharply with many indigenous spiritualities that see a unified, interconnected web of life, where humans are a part of, not separate from nature. The human-centric approach places human needs and interests at the center, prioritizing them over all other species and ecosystems. In this view, nature is valued for its usefulness to humans, such as for timber, clean water, or recreation. The intrinsic worth of other species and the planet is overlooked. Critics contrast this approach with deep ecology, which advocates for an ecocentric or life-centered worldview. The shallow approach of mainstream conservation is critiqued for focusing on human welfare and economic growth rather than the inherent value of all life. The economic systems driving much of conservation treat natural resources as commodities to be managed and traded. Even positive-seeming initiatives like ecotourism can be based on a human-centric, commodified view of nature, where the economic benefits of tourism outweigh the spiritual or intrinsic value of the protected area. Financial mechanisms like carbon credits frame nature's value in economic terms, contributing to the broader system of viewing the environment as a resource to be bought and sold. Growing movements and philosophies are challenging the exclusion of spirituality and the dominance of anthropocentrism in conservation. Many conservation strategies remain human-centered, valuing nature for its utility to humans rather than for its intrinsic worth. This instrumental approach is in stark contrast to spiritual worldviews that see all life as sacred and interconnected. Animal rights philosophers, like Tom Regan and Martha Nussbaum, argue that many non-human animals are subjects of a life with inherent value similar to humans. They contend that this intrinsic worth means animals should not be treated as mere tools for human ends. Arguments from figures like Peter Singer highlight that because many animals are sentient, capable of experiencing pain, pleasure, and fear, their interests should be given equal consideration to the similar interests of humans. To inflict suffering for frivolous human benefit is therefore unjustifiable. Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach extends the concept of dignity to animals by arguing they have a right to flourish and realize their natural capabilities. A dignified life in this view involves the freedom to engage in species-appropriate behaviors, such as play, affiliation, and control over their environment. The concept of animal dignity is rooted in anti-speciesism, the idea that discriminating against a being based on their species is as arbitrary and morally indefensible as racism or sexism. From this perspective, an animal's life has value for its own sake, not just for its utility to humans. Regarding zoos, critics argue that the inherent confinement and display of animals strip them of autonomy and dignity, even in naturalistic enclosures. A dignity-focused approach might advocate for sanctuaries over traditional zoos, or prioritize the conservation of animals in their natural habitats. The concept of animal dignity challenges the human-centric approach to wildlife management, where conflicts are often resolved in favor of human interests. Further, it encourages a non-hierarchical perspective that seeks cohabitation by respecting the animal's natural behavior and right to exist.